Konami has recently put a huge focus on the fire attribute, releasing a lot of new fire and pyro support cards. So today we'll be taking an opportunity to rank some of the best fire monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Here this is at number 10, we have Knightmare Phoenix. This is a Link 2 monster with 1900 attack that requires any two monsters different names for its materials. Knightmare Phoenix's effect is when you Link summon it, it allows you to discard a card to target a spell or trap card your opponent controls and destroy it. And if Phoenix is co-linked when you do this, you can also draw a card. Speaking of co-links, if Knightmare Phoenix is part of a co-link, all co-link monsters, including Knightmare Phoenix itself, cannot be destroyed by battle. Knightmare Phoenix is arguably the least powerful card on this list, but you could argue that it and its fellow Nightmares have had some of the biggest impact on the way players play the game. Knightmare Phoenix specifically made it so that every deck in the game that can get two monsters on the board can have readily accessible ways to deal with back row. This utility wasn't unheard of before Phoenix. Plenty of rank 4 monsters came with powerful removal effects as a useful utility out of the extra deck, but that excluded a lot of decks that didn't have easy rank 4 access. The Nightmares made it so everyone had an answer for pesky trap cards, and this alone caused a huge paradigm shift to make trap cards too slow for modern play, as it's too easy for players to either force a trap card's activation before it's relevant, or eliminate it entirely. Knightmare Phoenix is one of the most played extra deck monsters ever, even included in decks that have basically no use for the extra deck most of the time like Floowandereeze, just on the off chance they end with two monsters in the field that ended up with their effects negated, and could use a generic extra deck tool in the corner case scenarios. Few other monsters are so ubiquitous and useful. Even its co-link effect was relevant in multiple formats. Protecting your Trigate Wizard or Appaloosa from battle while establishing the co-link these monsters synergize with, and want to do anyhow, was a very common way of protecting your board for link-based decks. Doubly so during Master Rule 4 when co-linking and extra linking were the dominant strategy of the era. Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole changed in an extreme way the day Phoenix and its sibling cards dropped into the format, and we're still living in that new paradigm shift. So even if just destroying one spell or trap card isn't the height of power, the way Phoenix makes it so accessible is the height of utility, and earns Phoenix a spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Salamangreat Gazelle. This is a level 3 Cyberse with 1500 attack that can special summon itself from your hand to the field if a Salamangreat monster is sent to the graveyard, not including itself. When Gazelle is normal or specialed, you can send a different Salamangreat card from your deck to the graveyard. Both of these effects are hard ones per turns. Salamangreat Gazelle is the mascot and best monster of the all-time great fire-focused Salamangreat deck. Salamangreat is arguably the best deck in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! That focused primarily on fire monsters, being a mainstay of the popular toss format alongside its peers, Thunder Dragons, Orcus, and Sky Striker. Gazelle is one of the few fire monsters to serve an extended time on the Forbidden and Limited list, being limited for years until very recently being taken off. Gazelle forms the backbone of Salamangreat's resource loop, and ability to interact with your opponent. Basically, any other Salamangreat monster can fulfill Gazelle's condition to summon itself by just linking off her Salamangreat Bale links. This lets Gazelle search up whatever the deck needs. Are you going first and need a powerful trap card as interaction? Well, Gazelle can send Salamangreat Roar or Salamangreat Rage to the graveyard, which then in turn can be easily added back off of Salamangreat Sunlight Wolf. Do you need a quick extender to get an extra special summon and do some link climbing? No problem. Just send a Salamangreat Spinny to the grave who can special summon itself. If you already got all that, why not send a Salamangreat Cycle to recur Sunlight Wolf and ensure you have follow-up for the next turn? While most monsters can't search extra copies themselves from the deck, Gazelle's ability to find a Salamangreat Circle, which can in turn fetch another copy of Gazelle, circumvents that limitation very easily, and is part of why Salamangreat has such a legendary grind game over the course of multiple turns. Salamangreat is one of the best decks Yu-Gi-Oh's ever had, and despite years of power creep, is still playable to this day as a rogue strategy because of just how efficient and effective the engine is. And the heart of that engine is Gazelle. The best monster for the best fire decks is enough to land Salamangreat on this list for fire monsters that are the best ever. And at number 8 on this list, we have Sky Striker Ace Kagari. This is a Link 1 machine monster with 1500 attack, but it gains 100 attack for each spell card in your graveyard. When Kagari is special summoned, you can target any Sky Striker spell in your graveyard and add it to your hand. You can only special summon Kagari once per turn. Sky Striker Ace Kagari is the heart and soul of the Sky Striker extra deck. It's primarily known for its ability to recur Sky Striker Mobilize Engage to let you abuse its lack of a once per turn ability to occur card advantage multiple times throughout a regular turn. Much like its immediate predecessor on this list, Sky Striker was one of the main meta threats during TOS format. But with Sky Striker being one of the earlier released archetypes of that group, it has a bit more history and even more longevity than the rest of the decks there. While Kagari is monumentally important to Sky Striker, the plays it enables are entirely generic when you splash the right Sky Striker spells, letting any deck potentially capitalize on Sky Striker's draw power with Engage. Thanks to Engage being able to search out Sky Striker and Mecha Hornet drones, either card would get you the material you need to link summon Kagari. Kagari then could add back either Hornet drones if you needed to link climb to free link 2, or back Engage if you're looking for something else. If you already had some spells in play, you could resolve 2 Engages and draw 2 more cards while adding another useful Sky Striker spell to your hand, like Sky Striker Maneuver Afterburners or Sky Striker Mecha Widow Anchor, giving this engine more draw power than even Pot of Greed in decks that can enable it, which did include Sky Strikers, but plenty of spell-heavy decks benefit from Engage's insane potential card draw, and Kagari's capability to make the entire setup work anywhere. This led to Sky Striker not just being its own powerful deck, but being part of dozens of different popular decks and engines over the years. This generic power provided by Kagari has made Sky Striker the deck that has won more major tournaments than any archetype in history, being a core part of over 17 YCS winning decks, more than any other archetype in history, as well as untold number of WCQ wins and even more minor tournaments. This would lead Kagari, as well as multiple of the other Sky Striker cards, to be plastered all over the Forbidden Limited list, at one point being the most directly hit archetype on the list, even more than its fellow TOS contemporaries. While Kagari and Sky Striker have fallen off in power level compared to a lot of modern archetypes, the deck still managed to win a major tournament as recently as 2022. It's hard to oversell just how impactful and powerful Sky Striker as both a deck and a secondary engine has been to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Kagari is one of the most instrumental cards in that accomplishment. And thwarting all your best plays at number 7, we have Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This is a level 3 zombie tutor monster that you can discard from your hand to negate any effect that would add a card from the deck to the hand, send a card from the deck to the graveyard, or special summon a monster from the deck to the field. Ash Blossom is what's commonly known as a hand trap, cards you can activate directly from your hand regardless of turn, usually to interrupt your opponent's plays in some way. Of all the many hand traps Yu-Gi-Oh! Has, Ash is by far the most played and most prolific in the TCG, with only the banned Maxi eclipsing it in other formats. But what makes Ash Blossom so widely played? In modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, most decks are trying to enable some kind of basic combo to end on a powerful board state, and the most consistent way to do that is by having a ton of different cards in your deck that can access your most important combo pieces from the rest of your deck. The most common way to do this is with search cards. The most classic example of this is Reinforcements of the Army as far as searching for a card, or cards that special summon from the deck like Emergency Teleport, or cards that send graveyard relevant cards directly from the deck to the graveyard like Foolish Burial. While a hand trap like DD Crow might be great at dealing with someone's Foolish Burial target, it can be pretty useless in the other two cases. A monster that searches an important card like a Luber, adding the powerful card Branded Fusion, can be thwarted by Infinite Impermanence or Effect Veiler, but neither of those cards can interact directly with a Branded Fusion already in hand. The common link between all these kinds of effects? They're moving a card from the deck to a place the player can access them, the hand, graveyard, or field. And in every single case mentioned, Ash Blossom can stop the effect. As it stands, the kinds of effects Ash Blossom stops are almost always the most common effects in the game in practically any deck. Even Floodgate heavy stun decks that largely don't care about hand traps and aren't trying to piece together a specific combo still like to draw cards with the effects like Pot of Extravagance or Card of Demise, and Ash stops these kinds of effects in their tracks. Ash Blossom has had a relevant effect in nearly every matchup in Yu-Gi-Oh! Since its printing, even if sometimes its effect isn't enough to completely stop a deck from comboing or isn't entirely profitable. It's almost never a dead card in any situation, and for that distinction, it's the most played fire monster in the history of the game, and absolutely one of the best. Arriving on the scene at number 6, we have Rescue Ace Turbulence. This level 9 machine monster has a huge 3000 attack and defense and can special summon itself from your hand by banishing 2 Rescue Ace cards from the graveyard. Turbulence's effect on the field is, during your main phase, you can set up to 4 Rescue Ace quick play spells and or normal traps of different names directly from your deck to the field. Also, if another card you control leaves the field thanks to an opponent's effect, you can target a card in the field and destroy it. Rescue Ace Turbulence is the big boss monster of the Rescue Ace archetype, one of the newest archetypes in the game as of this video. With the advent of the Sinful Spoil cards alongside Diabell Star the Black Witch to support them, Rescue Ace has very recently become one of the metagame dominant decks. The main goal of Rescue Ace decks is to quickly summon a Rescue Ace Hydrant. This card is powerful in its own right, enabling all sorts of secondary effects from the Rescue Ace cards while kicking off the deck's combos. And while Hydrant is a critical piece and the most important starter in the deck, and deserves its own honorable mention as a great fire monster just for that, the deck's real power all comes down to Rescue Ace Turbulence. The ability to immediately go +4 with its effect when you get on the field isn't just powerful, it's preposterous. It's arguably the single best main deck boss monster ever when it comes to creating varied kinds of interaction on turn 1 for your opponent to deal with. The first of Turbulence's usual sets is a quick play spell, Rescue, that lets you special summon a Rescue Ace monster from your graveyard, which can signify a piece of interaction like Rescue Ace Preventor's Book of Moon style effect while dodging mass back row removal. And if you control Hydrant while you activate it, you can even steal a monster from your opponent's graveyard if you just so happen to answer a powerful piece of disruption or want to rob your opponent of access to it. Next is Alert, which lets you add either a Rescue Ace monster from your graveyard to hand, or potentially from deck to hand if you control a Hydrant, giving the deck immediate follow-up or access Rescue Ace Impulse, who works like a hand trap and can get you into other Rescue Ace monsters as further disruption. Then there's the traps, starting with Contain, which acts as a monster effect negation that also stops the target from attacking and prevents the monster from being used as an extract material if you control Hydrant. A pretty debilitating effect either way. Finally, there's Extinguish, which destroys an effect monster your opponent controls and prevents that monster's name from ever using its effect anytime later in the turn if you control Hydrant. 4 cards that are all powerful in their own right, but you get access to all of them off of a single card that itself comes with a solid form of interaction and great stats. Turbulence is an unreasonably powerful single card, for representing so many effects all in one relatively easy to access package. It's the best new fire card and the real powerhouse of Konami's recent focus on fire monsters. And burning its way into number 5, we have Phoenixian Cluster Amaryllis. This level 8 plant monster has 2200 attack and can't be special summoned besides its own effect, or the effects of Phoenixian Seed. If Amaryllis attacks, you destroy it after damage calculation, which helps with its effect to deal 800 damage to your opponent when it's destroyed and sent to the graveyard. During your end phase, you can banish a plant monster from your graveyard to special summon Phoenixian Cluster Amaryllis in defense position. Phoenixian Cluster is a mainstay feature of broken cards on lists like these, which is funny considering how little play it saw when it was released. It's a relatively old card, debuting back in 2009, and saw practically no play outside of very janky gimmick decks because of its weird restrictions and an effect that doesn't do much if you just resolve it once. But the obvious problem with Amaryllis is not resolving its effect once, it's resolving it 10 times. Amaryllis' problem is that it has not 1, but 2 effects that lack a hard once per turn. And they're the 2 kinds of effects you least want to see without 1. Burn damage and special summoning. For most of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, the special summoning nature of Amaryllis' effect isn't that big a deal. It was fairly hard to get 9 plant monsters in the graveyard and Amaryllis itself into rotation to make it an issue. But with the advent of years of generic plant support, like Lonefire Blossom, Gigaplant, Evilthorn, and others, filling the graveyard with a bunch of plant bodies to fuel Amaryllis becomes fairly easy. Alongside the release of Link monsters, this created a perfect storm of support that made Amaryllis not just playable, but immediately degenerate and problematic. Most of the blame that doesn't belong to Amaryllis goes into its partner in crime, Topologic Bomber Dragon. This card instantly made the lack of a once per turn in the end phase matter a lot more. Amaryllis could summon itself to a zone that Topologic Bomber Dragon points to, Bomber would destroy Amaryllis with its effect, your opponent would be burned for 800 damage, and you could repeat that process 9 more times for 8000 damage and a first turn kill at your opponent's expense. This FTK was quite powerful and quite consistent, thanks to the ease with which cards like Beatrice or Curious could get Amaryllis into the grave, along with the mass special summon capabilities the plant engine in the deck already enabled to make linking up to Bomber simple. Amaryllis is a bit of a one-note card. It's only good at one thing, but when that one thing is a powerful first turn kill, it's good enough to earn you a spot on both the Forbidden list and the list of the best fire monsters. Setting at number 4 on this list, we have Performage Plushfire. This is a level 4 spellcaster with 1000 attack and defense and a pendulum scale of 5 and 2 effects. Its first effect is as a pendulum scale, you can special summon Plushfire from the pendulum zone if a Performage monster you control is destroyed, and you take 500 damage for your troubles. Plushfire's monster effect is that if it's destroyed, you can special summon 1 Performage monster from your deck or hand, excluding another copy of Plushfire. Now, one of the best effects a pendulum monster can have is the ability to special summon itself from the pendulum zone. Plushfire does you one better. Special summon itself for basically no cost, as 500 damage is pretty irrelevant. The funny thing is, that's not even the important part of Plushfire. What really matters is Plushfire, when it's destroyed, even as a pendulum scale, lets you special summon directly from the deck. And whenever a card lets you special summon from the deck, oftentimes things get quite messy. In Plushfire's case, it's partly because it lacks a hard once per turn on this already powerful effect, and partly because there are tons of pendulum cards that love destroying cards you control, especially other pendulum scales to fulfill their effects. As a relevant historical example of this, Luster Pendulum the Draco Slayer was a mainstay of pendulum decks for its pendulum effect to destroy your other scale and search a card with the same name. So you destroy your Plushfire, then add another Plushfire to hand, and special summon out a free Performage monster from your deck. A pretty nice setup netting you a free card and a free special summon, while loading up your face-up extra deck with Plushfire. And this kind of interaction was seen in lesser ways with other Pendulum cards, but because of Plushfire's lack of a hard once per turn, you could just keep doing it. So with this ability to trivially get multiple copies of Plushfire into rotation, suddenly you're getting tons of free Performages on the field, filling up your face-up extra deck with Plushfires, and once you actually commit to a Pendulum summon, suddenly you've got all this insane material generation that you can just destroy the Plushfires on field all over again, getting even more summons and more cards added off of something like Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer. That's not even mentioning the monsters it's chain summoning. The other Performages include standalone great cards like Performage Trick Clown and Performage Damage Juggler, who can both also plus you again when uses materials for their powerful extra deck plays. These other cards were good enough on their own as rank 4 enablers, and Plushfire just brings them out for free. If that wasn't enough, thanks to being a Pendulum monster, it was very easy to search in its heyday thanks to Wavering Eyes, or just being the best search target for Damage Juggler. It was so instantly broken, it was part of the Tier 0 Performapal Performage deck, one of the few decks in history to earn an emergency ban list, where Plushfire was one of the obvious cases of the emergency and received a swift banning. If not for the fact that it was banned, it might still be one of the best material generation cards in the history of the game. Who knows what Plushfire could have done in an era of Link monsters and more powerful rank 4 options it could synergize with. But that's just speculation. What isn't speculation is Plushfire is absolutely one of the best fire monsters ever. Next up at number 3 in this list, we have Heavymetalfoes Electrumite. This Link 2 Psychic monster has 1800 attack and requires 2 Pendulum monsters to Link Summon. When it's Link Summoned, you can add any Pendulum monster from your deck directly to your face-up extra deck. Then, as a soft once per turn, you can target another face-up card you control, destroy it, and then add a face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. Finally, if a card in your Pendulum zone leaves the field, you get to draw 1 card. But this draw is a hard once per turn. Heavymetalfoes Electrumite is basically everything every single Pendulum archetype wants in a single monster. So long as you're playing Pendulums, it's completely generic to summon, and just as importantly, it immediately searches the best Pendulum monster in your deck with its first and second effects together, first adding it to the extra deck, then to your hand. And while destroying another card you control to actually add the card you searched to your hand seems like a downside, popping your own cards is the entire point of several different Pendulum archetypes. Just imagine what was previously explained with Plushfire and how a lot of Pendulum monsters trigger effects that plus you when destroyed in the Pendulum zone. Electrumite's cost is therefore just another combo enabler. Thankfully, Plushfire was banned a few years before Electrumite took the game by storm. But don't let that get you down, as for the low cost of searching a card for free and triggering your Pendulum effects by destroying them, Electrumite just also lets you draw a card. Without the card draw, Electrumite would still be an absurdly powerful and ban-worthy piece of generic Pendulum support. But with it, it becomes downright degenerate. Resolving an Electrumite is basically going an immediate +3, and while doing so, crafting your hand in combo with immense consistency. The card most often paired with Electrumite is Astrograph Sorcerer, a card that itself has Pendulum synergy effects to plus you with free special summons. Not that you were stuck always searching Astrograph, as many Pendulum decks of the era were happy to search out a hard-to-defeat Pendulum-based Floodgate like a Morphage Sloth with Electrumite's effect, giving every single Pendulum deck a free extra deck lock if they could Pendulum summon a level 6, which most could. It also doesn't help that Electrumite made Pendulum FTKs using the fellow broken Pendulum support monster's Supreme King Starving Venom to copy the effects of a burn monster and end the game on the spot. This ended up getting all 3 of Astrograph's Supreme King, and by far most importantly, Electrumite banned. Electrumite is one of the most powerful Link 2 monsters ever, and despite not actually being a Pendulum monster, is the best card Pendulum decks of all shapes and sizes have ever had access to. Link 2s have a history of being absurdly broken, and that's true of Electrumite as well as the next card on this list. And linking up at number 2, we have Spright Elf. This Link 2 Thunder monster with 1400 attack requires 2 monsters as materials, with at least one of them being a level, rank, or Link 2 monster. If you Link summon Spright Elf, you cannot use it as Link materials in the same turn. Spright Elf protects any monsters it points to with its Link arrows, preventing your opponent from targeting those monsters with card effects. And finally, as a quick effect during either main phase, Spright Elf can target a level 2 monster in your graveyard and special summon it to your field. Or if your opponent controls a monster, you can bring back a Link or rank 2 monster instead. Spright Elf is a monster that seems obviously powerful at first glance. But the more you look at it and the more you see it in play, you realize just how insane it is. Obviously, the card functions like any number of powerful Link 2 extenders. From the humble Splash Mage to the busted Crystron Hulky Fibrax, there's a huge list of Link 2 monsters that immediately summon another monster to extend your plays one way or another. The thing about Spright, and Spright Elf specifically, is this card has no true restriction to its archetype. There are an absolutely ton of level 2 monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh's history that Spright loves tossing in as secondary engines and payoffs. We even have an entire top 10 video on this channel dedicated to those kinds of tech options. Elf's ability to recur any level 2 monster was obviously powerful in Spright, letting you both use monsters like Spright Red and Spright Carrot as extra deck material, only to recur them back with Elf to use for their negation effects, and doing the same thing on your opponent's turn with Spright Blue or Spright Jet to give you instant follow-up for your next turn, all while protecting these valuable effects with its targeting protection. This alone made it a combination generic extender, protection for your most valuable piece of interaction, and a full combo follow-up. Elf was so good that decks didn't even need to run any Spright cards to use it. Famously, Spright Elf was at its most powerful when recurring a Tearlament's Amaryllis from the graveyard during the height of the Tearlament's dominance to set up mills and protecting already difficult to deal with tier boss monsters like Rukalos. In combination with fellow semi-generic extra deck monster Spright Sprin, suddenly any deck with a decent link climb could put any level 2 monster in the grave, then recur it with Elf. Decks that weren't even plain Spright monsters would do this to access Cyberstein to cheat out an Aturia Exterio, one of the most oppressive boss monsters ever. Cyberstein wasn't the only problem either. With the aforementioned Amaryllis and other powerful level 2 monsters like Diviner the Herald, it was obvious that Spright Elf was the common, unfair factor in all of these situations, earning it a well-deserved ban for being arguably the best monster in both decks in the incredibly high-powered Spright and Tearlament metagames. Messing with the graveyard in unfair ways is one of the best ways to make a name for a card in Yu-Gi-Oh! And earn you a place on the spot of a Forbidden Limited list and on a top 10 list. And on that note, finally taking the number 1 spot on this list, we have Lavalval Chain. This is a generic rank 4 Sea Serpent with 1800 attack. Once per turn, you can detach material to pick one of 2 effects. Either send any one card from your deck to the graveyard, or choose any one monster from your deck and put it on top of your deck. It should come as no surprise to see Lavalval Chain topping this list. Fire monsters, historically, are seen as one of the weakest attributes in Yu-Gi-Oh! And while it might not be immediately apparent, few cards in any attribute are as unfair as Lavalval Chain can be. Sending any card from the deck to the graveyard doesn't seem instantly broken at first glance. After all, Foolish Burial is legal, and monsters tend to be the best cards to send to the graveyard anyhow, right? But there's an enormous difference between an effect you only get to access once every 10 games you randomly draw, like Foolish Burial, and a hyper-consistent, easy-to-access tool out of the extra deck that you can reliably get every single game, and so you can build your entire deck around it. And while it didn't see play instantly, as rank 4 strategies needed a bit of time to develop, not long after its release, you would see this card played in basically every deck. Infernities were the first big deck that really loved Lavalval Chain, even for its less dangerous ability to stack a single monster on top of the deck, as if the Infernity player already emptied their hand, stacking an Infernity Archfiend to the top of the deck would let you pop off an entire Infernity combo on your next turn. But even in that deck, the graveyard send-in effect was insane, letting the deck revive a sent Archfiend with Infernity Necromancer and kick off a huge combo that way. Any deck with rank 4 access played it. Lightsworn loved sending cards directly to the graveyard, to Shaddolls who had plenty of level 4s and an entire archetype of cards that trigger for instant value effects when sent to the graveyard. Even decks that traditionally didn't care that much about the extra deck like Qliphort would run Lavalval Chain just to stack a Qliphort Scout to the top of the deck when they needed follow-up. What finally cemented Lavalval Chain as too good to keep around, after 2 years of non-stop play in nearly every deck, was Nekroz. Thanks to Nekroz having unusually good rank 4 access for a ritual deck with Nekroz of Unicorn, the deck would use Chain to send a Jin release of rituals to the graveyard and use it for its intended effect, replacing a ritual cost, and summoning a ritual monster who would lock your opponent out of special summoning. A debilitating and degenerate floodgate that took over an entire format as a tier 0 strategy. And while Jin got itself banned, it was obvious this kind of gameplay was always going to be a threat to repeat with Lavalval Chain legal. There are just too many cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That are way too powerful if you can always have access to them, and Lavalval Chain does that 2 different ways. After all, while its send into the graveyard effect is obviously busted, a lot of modern archetypes have been loading up with the ability to draw extra cards throughout the turn, like how Punk has their field spell, Punk Jam Extreme Session. Imagine a format with an extra deck monster that's as easy to access as Lavalval Chain, who can put any monster in the game on top of your deck to be drawn later in a combo. Lavalval Chain was banned for its ability to send cards to the graveyard, but both its effects are potentially ban-worthy, and neither even has a hard once per turn. It's too easy to summon and has 2 effects that are just ripe for abuse, and making executing any kind of degenerate strategy far too easy. It's not just the best fire monster ever, it's on the short list of best cards ever, and that more than earns it the top spot on this list. Alright, and that's the list. There are thousands of fire monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! So, are there any you think that should have been on this list instead? Do you have any ideas for other topics like this you'd like me to cover? If so, leave those suggestions down below in the comments.